My name is Victor Fuhrman. Some call me the Voice. I've always been fascinated with human nature, spirituality, science, and the crossroads at which they meet. Join me now and we will explore these topics and so much more with fascinating guests, authors, and experts who will guide us to Destination Unlimited. My guest this week on Destination Unlimited is Bernadette Gold. Her new book, A Crooked Path to a Charmed Life, is worth its weight in gold to those of us who have had to navigate our own way to find self-acceptance, purpose, and a deeper connection with spirit. Brutally honest and revealing, it inspires empaths and sensitives to embrace and enhance their gifts while avoiding the pitfalls of negative relationships and dogma. Bernadette Gold is a wealth activator, spiritual teacher, master healer, and consciousness leader, facilitating rapid breakthroughs in consciousness that lead to quantum leaps in income. Her passion is igniting and activating the lives of savvy, successful, high-achieving women, transformational leaders, entrepreneurs, and CEOs. Her website is bernadettegold.com, and she joins me this week to share her inspiring story. Please join me in welcoming to Destination Unlimited, Bernadette Gold. Welcome, Bernadette.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for joining us and sharing this incredible book. But the last time we spoke was when your book, 30 Days to a Charmed Life, came out. Before we get into the crooked path to a charmed life, please share a little with our listeners about that book.
Interesting. So that book I released in 2014, and then I pulled it. So it's no longer in distribution.
Oh.
Yeah, because a lot of my clients were reading it and they said, we need help. Can you just please teach a class? Can't get through it. It's too hard. And I know how difficult the work is when you're trying to do it alone. So I pulled the book. You can only get it if you do the class with me. And yeah, so it's no longer in print.
Wow. And for listeners who are interested, how can they do the class with you?
Anything that I do, you can find on my website at bernadettegold.com.
Wonderful. Okay. You want to give us a little tease about 30 Days to a Charmed Life?
So it's not 30 days anymore. After years of teaching that class, I do a 3-month or a 2-month version, sort of boot camp style. And then a lot of my people go on to do an entire year or more with me. A lot of people stay with me 2 to 3 years because their entire lives change the first year, and they want to keep up leveling and keep changing and keep growing and diving deep. One of the side effects of the work we do in Charm Life is that people's gifts open, even if they thought they didn't have any. So they want to stay to get a grasp on it.
Wonderful. Okay. So people can find out more about it at your website. Now, I normally ask guests to share their early paths before we get into their latest works, but the crooked path to a charmed life is filled with those memories, both good and bad, and is actually brutally honest and revealing. Let's begin with your childhood and how it shaped your understanding of relationships, both human and spiritual.
Wow, that's a great question. My childhood, from like before birth in the womb, was riddled with a mother who was not wanting a third child. So I came into the world rejected. I experienced a ton of abuse, emotional, verbal, sometimes physical, as I was growing up. Meanwhile, I was seeing things that no one else was seeing. And I learned that really wasn't acceptable. This was back in the 60s and early 70s. So it wasn't something that we, like nowadays, it's acceptable, right? In fact, people are intrigued by psychic gifts and being an empath. Not so much back then. It was considered very evil and it was scary. So I learned to keep it very quiet. But watching what people were doing in the human world, I hated it. I asked to be made blind. I didn't want to see it. Yeah.
And actually that manifested, didn't it?
It did. And I didn't realize that. I shared that story in the book. I didn't realize why my vision was so bad until I was 16. And it had gotten to the point where my vision was 20 minus 400. And the eye doctor looked at my dad and said, she's either going to taper off at 18 and her vision will level out and stay where it's at, or she's going to go blind. And as we went home, I remembered I kept seeing visions of me praying as a little girl, asking to be made blind. I didn't want to see the evil that people were doing to each other. I just wanted to experience my life with spirit.
Absolutely. And tell us a little bit more.
Well, with that, it did stop. The decrease of my vision stopped. It topped out at minus 450. So, and actually has stayed there since then, since I turned 18. And then I learned, I didn't ask for my vision to be restored. I just asked, please don't let me go blind. Because by then I was driving. I wanted to still be able to drive, right? When you're a little kid, you don't think about things like that. But of course, at 16, I wanted my driver's license and I wanted to be able to drive a car and be free. So I just said, I just let me continue to see, and my vision leveled out. And I started to realize, like, wow, someone is answering my prayers. Something is happening here.
Now, you mentioned the difficult relationship with your mother. How was your relationship with other members of your family?
With my dad, it's always been fairly good because I was raised by him primarily. My mother, we were off and on for a long time, but even with my brother and sister, not a great relationship. We were very cut off from the rest of our family too. My grandparents were very angry. My dad's mother, who was also psychic, I didn't learn about that till I was in my 30s. She had died when I was about 6 months old. So we kind of were cut off from all of our family.
Now, I remember you had said growing up in the 60s. I grew up in the mid to late 50s, having similar experiences. And when I was a kid, I was told that I had an overactive imagination. What kind of response did you get?
Well, my mom had been to tarot readers and psychics, and she knew that my grandmother was a psychic. So she believed in those things. But she called a priest to our house when I was like 5 years old. She called the Catholic priest from our church to the house. Now, I didn't really know what was going on, but from the looks of my guides and angels, it wasn't good. So they were trying, I guess the priest was trying to do some sort of exorcism or something with me to get the spirits to leave, to get me to stop seeing things.
And what were your relationships with the spiritual side in those days?
I think I was closer to them than I was to the humans in my life. They were always very comforting. They seemed to always be there. I thought they were real. It wasn't until people kept saying, who are you talking to, that I realized nobody else could see them or hear them.
And did they manifest as angelic beings or other things?
Both. Angels, there were spirits. Some of them were children's spirits, like my age, or at least they appeared to be. Some were older, kind of ancient, ageless looking. I recognize one of them to be my oversoul now. She's always been with me, but I didn't know who she was back then. So there's been all sorts of beings, angels, archangels. I know my grandmother used to hang out. Again, didn't know who she was because I'd never seen a picture of her.
And anything extraterrestrial or extra dimensional?
There was some darkness that plagued our lives, and it seemed like it always sort of manifested. And I didn't even get into a lot of that stuff in the book. Always seemed to manifest when things were going on with my mom, like when she was having a breakdown, when they were fighting, lots of dark stuff. And those were the times when I would just like hide under a blanket and call on the angels.
Please describe for our listeners the gifts that you came into this world with.
So initially, I knew it to be just the ability to see, right? Clairvoyance. I could see visions. I could hear, so clairaudience. And then the mediumship, being able to speak with those who crossed over in beings from the subtle realms. As I got older, I was able to predict things. And so I guess that's claircognizance or precognition. I had so many of my gifts wide open. And then being an empath, taking on the feelings of other people, not knowing that it wasn't my emotions, I constantly just felt bombarded.
I can totally empathize with you because I went through the same thing when I was a kid and into my at least my early teens before I sort of shut it down until later in life. But total compassion for going through that. You almost feel like you're the only person in the world who's experiencing it, isn't it?
Yeah, and you want it to stop, like you want to be normal. I remember that was my cry through my entire childhood. I just want to be normal. I want to be good because they kept saying I wasn't, and I want to be normal.
Now, you had mentioned your mother calling a priest in when you were 5 years old. What was it like to be aware of those gifts and how your religious affiliations challenged and suppressed them?
Oh gosh, through the Catholicism, and then the family kind of became Christian, fundamental Christian. It was never accepted, period. Like anything like that, any talk of any of that, it was not allowed. And I mean, I knew when the priest came that just from listening to what he was saying and the things he was doing, and he was praying over me, like I knew that I had somehow gotten in trouble. And my guides and angels really made me aware, just don't speak about it. And
And
so
what
I learned how to like look straight ahead or look down at my feet and listen to them more than acknowledge them with my own eyesight, because that way no one knew that I was seeing or hearing anything.
and when your affiliation changed to fundamentalist Christianity, how was that?
It was worse. I wish I could say it wasn't, but it was worse. And it was very confusing. I mean, both in the Catholic Church and then as we became Christian, the one thing that I recognized was like, they aren't talking about the same God that I know. Like, this is not the same God, right? So, like in the book, I made it little g, the religious God versus creator God, who's all loving, very different. And it took me many years to understand, get beyond the dogma. And I'd ask questions, especially in Catholic school. And I was always told, you don't need to ask those questions.
Mm. So, what is your relationship with the divine now, as opposed to then?
I actually have a relationship. I actually get to talk to God, and I refer to God a lot of times as spirit, but there's a constant conversation. There's a constant awareness that I'm always connected. And boy, when I'm disconnected, I can tell. And there's a void in me. So I'm honestly always trying to stay very high vibe and connected.
And in this connection, what type of information do you get?
Everything actually. I mean, I don't know that anything's off limits, because I'll ask anything and everything. Not that I get all of my questions answered, but the ones that matter, absolutely. But even with, if I'm making an investment, is this the right investment? When I moved from Colorado to Washington, there are many times I asked, can I please leave Colorado? And I kept getting, no, it's not time. No, it's not time. Finally, they said, yes, now you can go. So stuff like that. I always want to know that I'm doing the right thing and I'm serving properly and I'm on the right path so that I fulfill my purpose.
And you share in the book about an incident where you almost were involved in a terrible accident. And I relate to that because several years ago, I was driving in a local highway and it was 55 miles an hour is the normal speed limit there. And people were moving just about at 55 miles an hour. And there was a lot of traffic, but it was moving. And I was in the extreme left lane and a voice said, "Get out of this lane now." And always listening to that voice, I moved from the left lane to the center lane. Within 5 seconds, there was a multiple car pileup, and I would have been in the middle of it had I not listened to the voice.
Yeah, that was that to this day, that vision, because there was a vision that played out in my windshield, like a holographic vision. And it sort of took over the windshield, but I could still see where I was going. Very country road on the way to Durango, Colorado. It was so weird because I'd gotten in a car accident in this vision. Like this truck hit me and all I could see is flying glass. And then it morphed into a scene in a hospital and I had tubes all hooked up. And at that moment, after watching my daughter's life destroyed, my father break down, and my youngest just kind of, get all stoic. I was like, I can't leave yet. I said it out loud. I'm like, I know I can't leave yet. They need me. And I slowed way down. I think maybe I was going 65, close to 70 miles an hour. I slowed down to about 60. And within seconds, this big Dodge truck came right past me. And I watched in my rearview mirror. He missed my bumper by inches, had hit a car on the opposite side of the road that was sort of pushed out into traffic a little bit, but parked on the emergency lane. He bounced off that car right behind my car, pulled to the right because he was now in oncoming traffic, and then rolled the truck into the ditch like 3 times. The cops had told me, like, had you been just 5 seconds faster, he would have hit you head on.
Absolutely. Have you had any others that you can share with us?
I've had a lot of stuff like that. I mean, in the book, I shared about walking around a church one day with my friend Fran, living in Eastern Washington, and being yelled at and yanked and told to jump in the ditch. And just then a car came by and like they were trying to hit us. And that's what it felt like. Had we not been in the ditch, we would both be dead.
Amazing story, and something that, again, I can totally identify with throughout my life. Did you ever have a sense when these things happened that there was a negative force involved?
Always. Yes. Not the car accident one. That was more like a pivot point. Like, honestly, I made a choice in that moment when I said, I get it. I can't leave. And I knew that was a choice. I'd already had cancer, but I wasn't dealing with it. I was ignoring it. And it was not long after that I had to actually treat the tumor. But yeah, many times that I went through strange things, whether it was physical illness, avoiding an accident, being in the right place at the right time to avoid something. It always felt like something was trying to get to me. Even writing this book, though, I mean, I could tell you stories, which I won't, but like trying to get this book out.
7 years in the making, right?
Oh my God. Yeah. Since I finished Term Life, I started this book.
And what were the interferences that took place?
Well, you read the book, so you know about the murder investigation with the satanic dude, right?
Yes.
That scared me. Like, I was really afraid, and I didn't give any identifying information because I don't want anyone trying to go find the dude. He's bad. But part of it was being afraid, since he was able to backtrack me when I nailed him, being afraid that he'd find me. The other part was my kids still weren't grown up, and I didn't want any backlash coming on them. We lived in a very religious area in Colorado, like a lot of Mormons and Baptists. And as it was, they all called me a witch. I know. So, I didn't want my kids to have to suffer. They already had throughout their lives for my gifts and for what people thought I was. So then they grew up, and my youngest graduated last year. And actually this year. And I finally felt like, okay, I can get this done. But every single time I had someone work on the editing, or I'd try to get it finished, something would stop me. And then this last weekend, some weird stuff came up that was tied to the guy that was in the satanic cult that wrapped up my murder investigation career. And it was like, warning from the dark side, don't put this out. Like,
I was going to say, why do you think these things kept happening?
I think there's a lot of help in the book for people. One of the things that I kind of have noticed in the metaphysical space or in the spiritual space, not a lot of people will talk about the spiritual warfare end of things. They want to keep it love and light and, very positive, but there is another side to it. There are dark things. And if, you can't see that just walking around on the planet with the way people act, I don't know what to tell you. Right. But I actually address it because so much of my life was learning how to do spiritual warfare, learning that I had dominion over these things and learning not to be afraid of them. The more people learn, the more powerful we become and the more light is spread. So I think that's part of it. They don't want people to know.
They don't want people to be empowered.
Right.
Absolutely. You experienced many, many traumatic events in your early life, your married life, and later. What message did you get from these experiences, and how did you process this trauma?
Oh, so many messages. But you know, a lot of the lessons, I guess, that came out of all of it, I didn't learn until I look back. You know, when you're going through it, I know for me, I tended to just power through it. At times I fell apart through it. At times I felt like God left me. But the one thing that always came out of everything was I wasn't alone. I would never be alone.
You refer to Psalm 91 as something you drew upon often for comfort. What was there in that ancient writing that helped you?
That was given to me during a very dark battle initiation. And the Spirit gave that to me. It became what they told me was it's the spiritual warrior's prayer. Pray it and you're instantly enveloped in this loving presence of God. So it became my battle cry. There's things in the Psalms, and I still use it to this day. In fact, I teach my Charm Life people this, and one of my friends used it during the Australian fires last year. What's very interesting. So in the Psalms, it says 1,000 to my left, 10,000 to my right, not in my tent, depending on what version you have of Bible. But we domed up her property. We said a prayer of protection and we put a dome around her property using the Psalm 91. On the map that was released on the news, the fire that was breaking out in Australia that just burned hundreds of thousands of acres, you could see a circle, and it was right around her subdivision where she lived.
Mm. And it also references being embraced in the wings of the angels.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's a very comforting thing, very comforting description.
Yeah.
My guest is Bernadette Gold. Her new book is called The Crooked Path to a Charmed Life. Bernadette, please share with our listeners where they can get your book and find out more about all of the wonderful work you do.
So the book will be published and released on Amazon on October 11th. We have updates, and you can actually read chapter 1 for free right on my website, bernadettegold.com.
And what other services do you offer on that site?
I do spiritual counseling. I do private coaching, group programs, and I also offer some readings still.
And you teach a form of healing.
I do. I have my own modality called Sarvatva.
And tell us a little about that, please.
Sarvatva in Sanskrit means wholeness, completeness, and it's about using a high level healing frequency that brings balance and alignment back to the body, mind, and spirit all together.
Wonderful. Wonderful. And we'll be back with more of Bernadette after these words on the OMTimes Radio Network.
The cutting edge of conscious radio, OMTimes Radio, IOM-FM. OMTimes Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. OMTimes, co-creating a more conscious lifestyle.
Back on Destination Unlimited, my guest this week is Bernadette Gold. Her new book, The Crooked Path to a Charmed Life. You shared in your book that a friend introduced you to James Redfield's Celestine Prophecy, and it had a profound effect on you. What did you discover in reading that book?
I think it was one of the very first books that I read that discussed energy. And for the first time, I felt validated, like somebody else knows about this thing you can't see, but you know it's there and how to work with it. So it just lit me up. And that actually is what started me on the journey of discovering metaphysics and all the books that were out there. Before that, I had no idea.
Absolutely. You know, it's interesting. That book was a life changer for me because I recognized if you take away the drama part, the adventure story in the book, I recognized the synchronicities in my life, the teachers who were showing up and sharing information and that type of thing. Later, I attended the new seminary where my mentor, teacher, and friend, Rabbi Joseph Gelberman, who founded the seminary, offered the Hebrew words Hakol Beseda. The literal translation is out of chaos, order. But he shared that it meant everything is unfolding in divine order. He went on to say that we may not see this in our experience, but that ultimately there's a higher purpose at work. This is also a concept that you discuss in The Crooked Path to a Charmed Life. How did this understanding unfold for you?
Looking back, right? Not while I was going through certain events, but looking back, I could see every single thing that I experienced, everything I'd overcome. It was all part of my learning. And it was also part of the people that were in my life, whether it was my family or people that had crossed my path. It was part of the contract or the agreement that we had on a soul level to fulfill something for each other, to help each other grow. All of it was about growth on so many levels. I mean, emotionally, spiritually, there were so many things looking back. Yeah, I get it. And now, I mean, years later, right, my life has mellowed out and become fairly boring compared to what I used to go through. I look back and I think every single one of those things had to happen for me to be able to be who I am and help the number of people that I've been able to help and continue to help.
Yeah, it's reflected in the Buddhist belief that the expression is readiness in time. It says you have to go through a certain number of experiences to prepare you to be where you are.
Mm-hmm.
And you take away any one of those things and you don't get to that point.
Yeah, but when you're going through it, I mean, especially when you're not understanding that there's nothing wrong with you. For a long time, I thought I was being punished. You know, God's against me. And yet I'm surrounded by angels and spirits and they're teaching me things, you know, but after certain things would happen, battles would go on, it would get quiet. And it took a long time for me to understand there was these cycles. You know, you go through a new growth path, you expand, and then there's a period of rest and integration. And then there's the next lesson or the next battle. And it was just this growth path that I didn't understand. Looking back, I can see it and it makes perfect sense. And it all happened in order. But while I was going through it, it felt like absolute chaos.
I remember there was a book a few years prior to that experience that I shared called Why Bad Things Happen to Good People. And what would you say to someone who's going through challenges right now, who doesn't resonate or see right now the idea that everything that's happening has a higher purpose?
You can't see it when you're going through it, right? And I'm a skeptic at heart, funny enough, and I'm a psychic, but I didn't believe that there was a purpose, especially like my daughter's abuse. You couldn't tell me back then that there was a purpose to any of it. And yet now when I look back, because all the emotional triggers are gone, all of that has passed and I understand it now, I can see the order in all of it for her, for me, and even her dad, you know. So get through it, but be open to understand there is a reason, even if you don't understand what it is right now. Eventually you will.
Absolutely. You know, it's funny. My wife and I were talking with the anniversary of 9/11 about the unlikely series of events that led us both to serve as chaplains for the Red Cross after 9/11. And in the process of going back and thinking about it, the number of synchronicities and events that took place over that period of time, as awful as they were, resulted in many positive changes for many people that we know and for others. And just one of the crazy synchronicities, her first marriage did not end well. 15 years before 9/11, her first marriage did not end well. And while we were serving with the Red Cross at the Family Assistance Center, which was a beautiful pier that was set up on the west side of Manhattan, where people who were waiting word of their missing relatives were waiting there. And we were there to listen and to pray and to work with these folks and support them and comfort them. And there was an area where they could step out and get a cup of coffee or have something to eat. It was all provided by the city. And we stepped out to talk to people in that area and see if we could do anything. And she looks over and she says, I think that's my ex-mother-in-law. And it turned out that her ex-husband was one of the people who was up on Windows in the World and came flying out of the building.
Oh my gosh.
And she never knew about that until that night. And had we not been on that shift that night, when her former family members, her ex-mother-in-law and brother-in-laws were there, she never would have known that this fellow had perished.
Wow.
And there was a healing for her and that family in that process. So again, the unlikely path, the synchronicities, the strange events that in retrospect, we understand the higher purpose for. But while you're going through them, it really is hard to resonate.
Yeah, absolutely.
In your new book, you share that in order to connect with our spiritual guides, we need to raise our vibration. How may we do this?
There's a few ways, but the first step really is to begin to get your ego out of the way. And by ego, I don't mean like, arrogance and pride, which a lot of people think that's all ego is. No, ego is the seat of fear, the seat of anger and frustration. So we've got to begin with forgiving people from our past, forgiving ourselves, getting really into a place of complete acceptance and love. And just from doing that, your vibration can rise. And from the higher level, now you can begin to connect to your higher self. With your ego removed, you're able to connect to your intuition. You're able to connect to spirit.
What else do we have to do?
It really is just about accepting who you are, being in your truth, not what everyone else tells you you should do. So it's really removing a lot of programming, and to me, it's really about surrender. We can't control it.
You talk about forgiveness. A lot of people have experienced very egregious things, and yourself and your family, your children included. How do we forgive that?
A lot of it, for me, when I reached that place of forgiveness, I realized that holding things against everybody else, I was holding myself prisoner more than them. Like it was affecting me more than it was affecting them. They had moved on with their lives. They weren't holding it. I was holding it. So as I forgave others, I was able to forgive myself and set myself free.
And that's really who forgiveness is for. It's for the self. It's really not for the person being forgiven. Forgiveness ultimately is for the self.
Yeah, it unburdens us. I mean, we carry those things as baggage and chains.
Many teachers have said hatred is like taking poison and expecting the other person to die.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just encapsulating that energy, that negative energy within us that does not allow our positive energy and our higher vibration to start resonating.
And it freezes, it puts us in freeze mode, right? We can't move beyond the trauma if we're holding on to the anger, the hurt, the hatred. We can't move beyond it. It freezes us in that place.
In addition to surrender and forgiveness and self-acceptance, are there any other practices that you recommend? For example, meditation?
I love meditation. I think it's an amazing practice, whether it's active or you're seated. Meditation is amazing. EFT is another modality that I love to use for myself and others to discharge the emotional energy without re-traumatizing yourself. There's so many amazing modalities that have come onto this planet over the last 20 years, but meditation is probably one of my top ones.
For our listeners not familiar with EFT, just give them a brief explanation, please.
So EFT is emotional freedom technique, and you're tapping on the major meridians while bringing up an image or a feeling from the trauma or a trigger. And you tap through it. And as you do, you're releasing the stored emotional energy from it. It just discharges it very quickly. It's a weird thing how it works, but it does work, and it recenters and reconnects both sides of the brain so that you are free to move beyond that trauma or move beyond that emotional trigger.
What about acts of kindness?
Acts of kindness are so important because they're a blessing, right? Not to the other person, to the one doing the act.
And what kind of acts of kindness would you suggest?
Oh man, there's so many. I mean, the simplest ones, and they don't have to be these huge, because I hear from people like, I don't have a lot of money. How can I go and bless someone? It doesn't have to be huge. Look someone in the eye, look at the checkout person, look at them in the eye and just say, hello, thank you. Simple things. I hope you have a nice day, right? To the postman. Things that we don't slow down long enough, just doing that, helping someone, an older person, put their groceries in their trunk, right? Like put their cart away. It's just simple acts, because in that place, we're being of service and we're being of love.
Absolutely. That's something that I was blessed to have a mother who truly imbued my brother and sister and I with that type of thing. And she would say, if you walk through a door, turn around and see if there's someone behind you, hold the door for them, smile and say, have a great day. Simple things like that. Very frequently, I'll be in a supermarket and there'll be someone who's rather elderly trying to reach an upper shelf, and I'll say, may I help you? And I always ask permission first. I don't take it upon myself to do it, because you don't want to invade someone's space if they don't want it. And if they say, yes, please, then you reach up and you get it and just put it in their basket for them. And they're so grateful for these simple things that don't cost anything more than an open heart. That really is just what it's about.
Yeah. And it makes you feel so good that you got to be helpful.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So all these things can raise our vibration. And the process of raising our vibration, what does it help us do?
It helps us connect to the highest level of our own self. And in that place, it does allow us to tap the intuition, to be able to hear spirit, to receive guidance, to know and discern, good from bad, right from wrong. All these things, like we are connected to a much higher consciousness stream. And from that higher consciousness stream, we step into the place where everything just unfolds synchronistically, what some people call magic, when it really isn't. It's just, this is the way we're supposed to be living. And once you get used to that, you don't ever want to go back.
And you've taught many people and you've helped them to raise their vibrations. They've raised their own vibrations. What are the different clairs that have opened up for folks? And is that available to everyone?
I believe it's available to everyone, honestly. Like there's there clairvoyance, clairaudience, clairsentience, being able to sense or smell with your senses, right? Those things that can't be seen. And then claircognizance, mediumship. I think everybody can tap their gifts. Usually we have a primary, right? Like for me, for the longest time, my primary gift was clairvoyance. I would see visions, but then it changed, and my secondary was clairaudience, but then it shifted and it became more clairaudient, and clairvoyance became secondary. Usually we have two that are primary out of all the rest, but we have access to all of them.
I remember about 20 years ago teaching a class and teaching people how to determine which one of their clairs they worked with, or more than one. And what I would say is, if you say, I see what you're talking about, you're clairvoyant. If you say, I hear what you're saying, any of those words that describe the act, the physical act, if they were doing it physically, generally corresponds to the clair that they have available to them to develop.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's interesting too, because so many kids right now are just born with their gifts wide open. Yep. So many teenagers.
Yep. How many of them come up to you and say, I feel you. I feel you.
Well, sadly, I mean, my daughter has a ton of friends online, and sadly, a lot of them are still going through what I went through, where they don't have anyone to talk to unless it's online, because their parents don't want to discuss it and they're told not to talk about it.
And as a mother, and having been through this yourself, if there's a parent listening tonight who has a child that's showing these gifts, what would you suggest they do?
Support them. Don't judge them. Don't question them. Don't suspect them of anything. Allow them to speak about it. Don't suppress it. It's only going to make them feel like something's wrong with them.
Absolutely. And then also it causes them to push it back down and then cut it off, which sometimes they'll regain, sometimes they may not. So the gift of listening and appreciating and supporting and encouraging them is the greatest gift we can give our children in every aspect of life.
Mm-hmm.
My guest is Bernadette Gold. Her new book, The Crooked Path to a Charmed Life. We'll be back with more of Bernadette after these words on the OMTimes Radio Network.
Humanity Healing International is a small nonprofit with a big dream. Since 2007, HHI has been working tirelessly to bring help to communities with little or no hope. Our projects are not broad mandates, nor are they overnight solutions, but they bring the reassurance that no one is alone and that someone cares. To learn more, please visit humanityhealing.org. Humanity Healing is where your heart is.
Imagine yourself being transported to India, to the banks of the Ganga and an ashram in Rishikesh. Visualize that you are welcome to satsang with an American sannyasi who shares the wisdom of her guru. Your visualization has manifested. Join Sattvi Bhagawati Saraswati for inspiration and transformation every Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern on OMTimes Radio.
Hi, we're the Goo Goo Dolls. We're fortunate that we can give our daughters everything they need to grow and learn. But not every child can focus on classes and play dates.
Nearly 13 million kids in the U.S. face hunger. That's 1 in 6. School lunch might be their only meal each day, and it's heartbreaking to imagine any child going to bed hungry. We're dreaming of a perfect day when kids can smile, play, and just be kids without worrying about where their next meal will come from. Feeding America is working to make that perfect day a reality.
Each year, the Feeding America network of food banks rescues billions of pounds of good food that would have gone to waste. That food is given to families and children in need. Being a kid should be about doing things that make an ordinary day extraordinary. Learning to play an instrument, building a sandcastle, hosting tea parties. Hunger should never be an obstacle to growing up.
You can help end childhood hunger in your community by visiting feedingamerica.org.
Brought to you by Feeding America and the Ad Council.
Hello, I'm Sandy Sedgbeer, host of OMTimes Magazine's flagship radio show, What is Going On? My passion is sifting through information, research, and innovations from new thought teachers, speakers, and researchers pushing back the boundaries of what we know about life, energy, metaphysics, and the universe. I love shifting perceptions about who we are, why we're here, and how quickly impossible becomes normal when we open our minds, expand our awareness, and accept that the only limits that exist are those we place upon ourselves. So if you're the kind of forward-thinking, eager investigator of what lies beyond the current reality that most perceive, why not make a date to come play with me in the field of possibilities at 4 p.m. Pacific Time, 7 p.m. Eastern Time every Thursday, and together we can discover what's really going on.
Back on Destination Unlimited, my guest this week, Bernadette Gold. We're talking about her new book, The Crooked Path to a Charmed Life. Bernadette, in your book, you relate your lifelong love and deep connection with animals, especially horses. What do you find in those relationships that was missing from your two-legged connections?
Purity and innocence. Animals don't have an agenda, right? At all. So they made me feel really safe. And there was the ability to communicate with them, to form a bond with them. But they also react very much the same as humans do to trauma. So they taught me a lot about getting out of that fight, flight, freeze feeling. And my one horse, Quincy, my first horse, he taught me a lot just about trust and healing and working in a partnership, working in union.
I have not had a lot of experience with horses other than a couple of times that I visited some folks who had horses. And the one thing I noticed specifically about horses, and you see it also with other animal companions, but specifically horses, they have a depth in their eyes that is so unique.
Mm-hmm.
What is that about?
Horses have such an innate intuition, and you can see the depth of their intuition and their knowing in their eyes. I mean, their eyes seem to reflect so much about the many levels that we experience on earth, from the emotional to the physical to the spiritual, the energetic planes. Horses are just these amazing creatures, but they're so intuitive and they want to communicate, but they partner with us. They want to partner with us when they're domesticated.
That old expression, horse sense, I guess that really is true.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've rescued tons of horses and rehabilitated them. And it always broke my heart how people would bring me these problem horses and they'd say, this one has a problem. I got to be known as the problem horse trainer in San Diego for a long time. And it was never the horse that was the problem. It was the owner. Yeah. Because they didn't understand what the horse was trying to communicate, what the horse needed. And if you just slow down long enough, that animal will tell you in so many ways what is needed, and they'll guide you. They'll act as a guide to you.
It's interesting that connection with animals, we talked about raising our vibrations to prepare to receive and to reopen, rediscover our specific gifts. But that connection with animals, and also the connection with nature, to be out in nature, to be out in the trees and to be out in grass and to be out in forests and just ground ourselves, is so important in that process, isn't it? It
really is. And it gets us back into more of a natural rhythm when we're around animals and when we're in nature, we're at the beach. Our energetics change, our heartbeat slows down, our breath syncs up to more of a natural rhythm. We're not hurried and we're not rushed. And in that place, that's when we really can connect without trying.
In The Crooked Path to a Charmed Life, you detail issues, some horrific, that you experienced as a mother raising your children on your own. We have many women among our listeners who are single moms and may be struggling. What advice would you offer them?
Be honest with the people that do support you. Ask for help and learn how to receive. That was one of my biggest lessons as a mother, is there came a point in time when I couldn't do it alone anymore. And I didn't have support. I had exactly the opposite. So I had to learn how to reach out for help in a healthy way, and then how to accept that help. But keeping it all together on my own, it wasn't doing any good. Many women, especially single moms that are hustlers like I was, we're just going to do it. But eventually, we aren't strong enough to do it alone, nor are we meant to. So if you are struggling, reach out for help. Find other women that will listen to you, understand you, cheerlead you, sit in for you, sit with you, hold sacred space for you.
Absolutely. You have a program called Creating a Magical Life. What was your motivation for that, and how did it manifest?
So from my own learning of how to manifest, Spirit took me on this journey out of desperation. I was like, you have to teach me how to change my life. Like, I can't keep doing this. So for many, many months, I was taking notes and I was recording the things I was getting in vision and communicated by Spirit. And I put them to the test, truly put them to the test. I'm like, okay, if this is going to work, then eventually I'll teach it, but I need to know it works, and I need to know it works consistently. And this was back in the 90s. I hadn't really seen any books talking about how to do this. So they taught me and I put it to the test, and sure enough, it worked, and it continues to work. But it was the changing point of my life. It really put me in that path of understanding I can live in a place of ease. I don't have to constantly struggle.
And also, we had touched upon your healing practice earlier. How did that come into being?
I had known that I had healing gifts back when my daughter was little. Was the first time that, out of necessity, that I realized I could flow healing energies, and it worked to heal her hands. And through the years, animals would come along and I would, kind of lay hands on them and connect to spirit and then flow energy. And it just kept progressing. Like, year after year, my gifts would get stronger with the healing. I had to be in a place, though, energetically, that I could actually hold that higher vibration of healing. And it's just continued to get stronger and stronger, and I'm able to direct it. And the frequencies of the healing, not just for me, but actually some of the people I work with, the frequencies have changed the last few years. They've gone to a much higher place now.
And as we had discussed before in your book, you mentioned your couple of miracle healings.
Yeah. And actually have a lot just in the last few months with clients. Yep. Physical healing. I helped a woman who had been written off by the doctors 15 years ago, 10 years ago. She was in a car accident, broke her back, fused in several places, and was walking hunched over. And just a couple of months ago, she came to me for a session that we did on Zoom. And she came for one reason. Spirit said she needs healing. Take care of this. So I ran the Sarvatva on her, and we cleared a bunch of stuff and then imprinted some new higher frequencies. And she got out of pain instantly. And then she's like, I cannot believe what's happening. I'm like, what's happening? She said, I'm standing up a foot taller. You don't understand. I've been hunched over for 10 years.
Oh.
Yeah. And then so the next day I was like, I hope it kept. So I messaged her and I said, are you doing okay? And she said, yeah, it's holding. And she's a Reiki healer. So, she was open to receive the frequencies and heal. And then 2 weeks later, again, checked on her. How's it going? She said, I'm remodeling my house. I said, what? She goes, yeah, I'm remodeling my old historic house. And it's been months. It's been a couple months now. And sure enough, now she's writing her book, which has been on the back burner for a long time.
Absolutely. I had an experience. Again, this comes to listening to that voice. In 1975, I was stationed in Korea when I was in the Air Force, and I was having some problems with my back at the time. And a friend suggested I go out for acupuncture. Now, I did not know in those days that the needles were not disposable and that the sterility of those needles was in question in Korea, and that hepatitis B was endemic, which means many people in Korea carried it but didn't manifest any illness or symptoms. Long story short, I had the acupuncture. A couple of weeks later, I wake up one morning, I look in the mirror and my eyes are yellow. And I said, that ain't right. And I had lost my appetite, and I went to the hospital there, and they said, you have hepatitis. And they checked me in, and they started doing a series of tests and so on and so forth. And I kept losing weight and getting weaker. And the doctor came and asked me if I had a will. And I said, no. He says, well, we're going to get a JAG officer in here to help you do a will. And they telegraphed my mother back in New York saying that I was very seriously ill with the chances of my recovery doubtful, and made her day. And one night I just had this voice tell me, get a picture of a healthy liver. And I didn't know what it was about, but I listened, and I asked him for the doctor to bring me an anatomy book with a picture of a healthy liver. He said, why? I said, why not? It can't hurt anything, can it? He said, no. He did. I studied that picture about 15 or 20 minutes, and then I put the book down, and then I heard a voice saying, place your hands over your abdomen. And I did. Started feeling this wonderful tingling sensation, a warmth, and then at some point I fell asleep. Next morning, the nurse came in 5 a.m. and said, sorry, I got to take your blood. She took my blood. 2 hours later, came back. Sorry, the lab screwed up. We got to take more blood. Took more blood. Hour later, the doctor came in and said, what did you do last night? And I told him. He says, you're crazy. I said, why? He said, because last night we didn't expect you to survive the night, and this morning your liver levels, your enzymes are practically normal, and we've never seen that happen before.
Wow.
So I totally understand what you're talking about with healing. What would you like readers to take away from The Crooked Path to a Charmed Life?
That no matter what you're going through, have been through, no matter where you are right now, if someone like me can go through what I went through, and I only shared part of my journey, there was a lot more, but if I can get through it and I'm not crazy, living a pretty good life, you can get through it. Let it give you hope.
And her book is called The Crooked Path to a Charmed Life. It is intense. It is amazing. It is wonderful. It is inspiring. And as soon as it's available, it's coming out in about a week after the show comes on, you have to get her book. My guest, Bernadette Gold. Bernadette, one more time, please tell our listeners where they can get your book and also what you offer on your website.
So you can get the book on Amazon. You can also find it information about it and the launch on my website, bernadettegold.com.
And the other services that you offer on your website.
So I do psychic readings, I do spiritual counseling, coaching, and group transformational programs.
And tell us a little bit about the spiritual counseling.
That's for people who've tried traditional therapy and it hasn't worked. I work a lot with people with things like PTSD, trauma, and they've tried narrative therapy. They've been stuck there for a number of years, and then they come work with me, and we use different modalities like EFT, and I'm an NLP practitioner. I also flow energies while I'm speaking with people. And we just take it from a different track, right? And I use the healing frequencies that I've been gifted with from the divine to help people move beyond things. But the key there is without being re-traumatized.
Absolutely. Bernadette, I am grateful that you and I connected years ago, and I'm grateful that you've joined us tonight to share your work and your wisdom.
Thank you, Victor. It was so nice. And I'm so glad I know you.
Thank you. The feeling is mutual. And thank you for joining us on Destination Unlimited. I'm Victor, the Voice Fuhrman. Have a wonderful week.